I recently got some WoodRiver planes from Rob Cosman up here in Canada, and in this video I'm going to take you through the unboxing, disassembly and reassembly of the 5.5 jack plane and show you at the end of the video exactly what kind of performance you get out of the box. Now keep in mind he does do a preparation service on all the bench planes. If you want to know more about that prep service, I'll put a link to his website down below, or you can watch my video from a few weeks ago on a woodworker's Christmas and unboxing all of these things, where I actually list all of that right in the video. So check that out as well. I'd really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get this unboxed, cleaned up, and tear it down and show you what you get. Now, with the plane prep service that Rob does, you end up getting a shaving with the planes that actually shows you what the plane is capable of when they sent it to you. So the first thing I think I'll do is, just for entertainment value more than anything, we'll take one of these shavings and we'll just measure it with a caliper. Rob talks about being able to get down to about 1/2 of an inch. We'll see what kind of shaving he's provided for us here. So it's coming in at 1/2. So hopefully you can see that on the calipers here. The WoodRiver planes are modeled after the Stanley Bedrock designs. We're going to just take this all apart. Be careful not to damage that blade at all. I have not used this plane to see how it performs whatsoever. We're going to disassemble it, clean it all up, and then reassemble. So first thing we'll do is just get some rags going. And we want to be careful that we don't damage the cutting edge or the sharpening that they've done in that prep service. So we'll slide that chip breaker back, rotate it, pull it right apart there. I'm going to flip the chip breaker on its top, just so I don't damage the prepared end of that chip breaker that Rob and his crew would have done when they originally did the prep service on this plane. Now I'm just going to take note of, in the mouth here, where the frog was positioned front to back, so I can get it back into that same place when I actually reassemble the plane. But it kind of looks to me like it's roughly like 1/8 of an inch or so from the mouth opening. I'll just write 1/8 of an inch here on my bench hook, and then I'll just know that's where I want to return it to. And we'll completely disassemble everything. I think I'll actually take the tote and the knob or the handle at the front off as well. What I want to check is just how much surface area, or how well you've got the connection between the tote and the body of the plane. Actually, there was a video that Rob made at one point that I saw, and he talked about how the bottom of the handle and the body of the plane were maybe not necessarily really flat for each one, and they didn't meet up or mate very, very well with positive contact. It's very, very close to 90 degrees to the side, which is good. And it looks to me like, for the connection of that handle to the body, I actually think I can see, in addition to the circular milling marks, I think I can see some longitudinal scratches, which maybe were the result of a hand file going back and forth to flatten that area, just to get a little bit of a better contact between the handle and the body. And that's a really good thing to note, because as long as you're at a very good perpendicular angle between the handle and the body, you're going to have a very comfortable neutral position for your hand going forward when you use the plane, and you'll also have a good solid connection with the body when you've got a nice flat surface on those two mating parts. And I don't think I've ever seen any of his videos where he does anything with the front knob. whatsoever really, but we'll just pop it off quickly since we've came this far and there's no other parts to take off. Okay, so that top brass screw is actually more of a nut. Okay, so let's go through the process of reassembling this. As I do that, what I'm going to do is talk about each one of the pieces and what I think about them and what I know about them from reading on both the Woodcraft website as well as Rob Cosman, his website. First thing that I'll tell you is the body is made out of stress-relieved ductile iron, and it's my understanding that it will not break if you drop it, which is a plus, and that it stays flat over the course of time. It's going to retain its shape and its flatness very, very well. So let's check a couple of things with the body and see how it is. The first thing we want to check is how square the sole is to the sides, because if we're ever going to use it on a shooting board, which I will, you want to make sure that that is very good and square. And certainly on this one side, we are very, very square. I'm not even going to bother getting a feeler gauge out, trying to measure it like Rob does in some of his videos, because that's very square. Let's flip it over to do the right-hand side here. Now this is pretty square as well. I can see a whisker of light up along the very top edge of the side, but pretty darn square. Certainly, I would call that within tolerance. The other thing I'll check is just how square that mouth opening is to the side. And I think that's really darn square. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. The next thing we're going to check is how flat the sole is. I have a feeler gauge that is 2/1000ths of an inch, and if I set it under the one corner, it's certainly got the weight of the sole on it here as well. This front corner, it's not even touching underneath. It's touching more on this corner here. There's a bit of friction there. Let's see what it's like along the edge here. Yeah, I can't pull it out, can't pull it out, can't pull it out, can't pull it out right at that mouth opening. So what about on the other side if we go down it? Can't pull it out, or there, or there, or there. Not there either, and not at the mouth opening. This corner seems to be up a little bit on this front left corner. Either this is a little out of flat or my table saw wing is a little bit out of flat right in that corner right there. But I'm not going to worry about it because 2/1000ths of an inch, I can't see that, neither can any of you guys, so I'm going to call that a win right there. It must be pretty darn flat because when you pick that up off of that table saw wing, you can feel the suction actually. It's resisting coming up off that surface, so it's got to be pretty darn flat. Okay, so the other thing they do in the prep service is they chamfer and ease the entire perimeter of the sole. You'll notice if there's a burr or a raised edge around the perimeter of a plane, when you actually start to use it, and as you're pushing it across the board and you're skewing it, if the plane wants to go in the line of the actual sole itself, then you're going to have to ease the perimeter edges a little bit more so that the plane doesn't want to track based on the direction you've got it skewed. But we'll test that at the end of the video and we'll see if it does that or not. But for now, I'm not going to touch it. All I'm going to do is reassemble things and show everyone in the video what we're dealing with when you get a plane from WoodRiver. Let's start to put this back together. So hopefully this shows up on camera well, but there is a center screw that actually fits into this little slotted plate on the frog. And as you screw it in and out, it allows the frog to advance forwards and backwards to be able to open or close the mouth on the plane. Let's just talk a little bit about the machining on this before I go actually installing that frog again. So I'm not certain how well you'll be able to see this on camera, but the cone-shaped screw comes through this hole machined into the sole or the body of the plane, and it looks to be very centered on this particular hole. It's maybe a little off to the left on your screen, just by a fraction of a millimeter or maybe a millimeter at the most on this one, but pretty good machining there, I would say. But let's get the frog actually back in and engaged. So we'll line up this plate with the slot on the screw that moves the frog forwards and backwards, like so. And we'll have to back off those retaining pin cone screws just enough so that these retaining pins will drop in. These pins actually have a little dot on them, which indicates where the actual cone hole is. So you want that dot to point right straight to the back or the rear of the plane when you drop it into the hole there. And I'm just going to put my finger on it as I tighten it so that it doesn't rotate or spin, so that that cone can actually engage into the hole. There. Good. Let's lock it in place right there. And I always like to tighten a little by little on each side and then try to adjust it a little bit so that it's as parallel to that mouth opening as I possibly can get it. I'm not going to torque down on these like crazy. I don't think that frog's going to move with just a little bit of tightening there, but I will just get this other one just to the point of snugging up on that rear plate, just so everything's tight and we don't get any vibrations whatsoever. These handles are made out of babinga, it says on Rob's website. These brass screws all seem to be machined very nicely. They look great. I can't wait to get this thing in operation, and I'm sure most of you guys watching the video can't wait for the end too, just to see how it operates. I'm just feeling to get the handle dead center onto the bed that it sits on here. We'll get this front one on as well. And the last thing to do is to put the knob back on that's going to advance the blade. And it's made out of brass, and it looks to be machined very nicely. In the order that I made with Rob Cosman, I did get some of the plain adjust stars to replace that knob, and that's what they look like right there, in case you've never seen one before. And it's intended to allow you to just get your finger on the advancement wheel or knob to be able to spin it very easily. I'm not going to use it for this video. I want to keep this purely as how the plane was sent to me and how it's going to be sent to everybody else when they get a plane from Rob. I don't want to make it about that adjust star quite yet. I'll make another video on that to let you know what I think about it. Hopefully this shows up on the camera well, but I've got the wheel installed, and here's the yoke and where it attaches to the wheel. There's very, very little backlash there. There's a little bit of play, and that just allows that wheel to move very, very freely. But good machining here. There's not very much space in there where there's some backlash. The lateral adjustment lever, it operates quite smoothly. There's maybe a little bit of friction on it when you move it to this one side, but that'll loosen up a little bit more just from regular use over the years as I get using the plane. Okay, let's turn a bit of our attention to the blade and the chip breaker. The chip breaker actually has a bit of an angle on the back of it so that it makes positive contact right along the front edge. So you've got the chip breaker itself, and the leading edge of it is actually not parallel. It actually is tipped down a little bit so that it only makes contact with the blade right out at the very tip. And part of the preparation service is preparing that edge so that it's actually going to make contact all the way from one side to the other, and that helps to prevent the blade from chattering and gives you a much more positive contact between the two mating surfaces. That's been prepared, so I'm not going to monkey with that whatsoever. As far as the blade goes, there's a very small back bevel that was put on here, so hopefully you can see that from the one edge all the way to the other. There's a very highly polished back bevel on here, and that's done with that preparation service using the Charlesworth ruler trick that Rob talks about all the time, and I do that on my own sharpening as well. It's a very uniform strip, so that tells me that the blade is most likely pretty flat. The blade could be concave when it is sent to you, which is fine. It could be very flat like this one seems to be, or it could be convex, which there's no way you're ever going to be able to sharpen that properly. You need to send it back if your blade's ever convex. And the way to know that is when you put that back bevel on, if you only get polishing in the middle, or if the blade, when it's down on your stone, wants to rock, then you know that it's actually convex like that on the back surface of it. So this one looks pretty flat. I like that. It's great. And I can also see that we've got a nice edge on here from that preparation service. So this should cut wood very, very nicely once we get this installed back into the plane. There's two other things that I'll say about the blade. One is that it's made out of high carbon steel, and it is at a Rockwell hardness of 60 to 62. And the other thing is the thickness of it. So they're supposed to be 1/8 of an inch thick. We'll just check it in a couple different places. 123, 126. So yeah, it's definitely a full 1/8 of an inch thick at multiple locations. So let's see how sharp this blade is when they send it to you. So it should be able to create a nice cut on the paper very easily. Yep, that is sharp. So let's get the blade mated up with the chip breaker again so we can get it back in the plane. When you put a chip breaker onto a blade, you want to put them together essentially at 90 degrees to one another, and that will ensure that you're not going to damage the sharp edge that you've created in the sharpening, and you're not going to damage any of the preparation work that was done on the chip breaker either. Bring it right up to the edge, very close to the edge, like within about a 1/16 of an inch before you tighten it down. I like to put it up so that it's in contact with the entire back bevel that was put onto the plane. That way you know you've got the most amount of contact on as much of that flat surface that you've created during the sharpening process, just like so. I think that shows up on the camera pretty good. And you want to be careful when you install this back into the plane. You don't want to damage that highly sharpened edge whatsoever. The last thing I'll tell you about is the lever cap. This lever cap looks to be in great condition. It's got like I don't actually know what it's made out of, but it's got a really nice patina on it. It's kind of like a brushed nickel type of a finish in my opinion, and it looks great. I quite like that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll try and get that blade just coming out of the sole, so we can try and decide if we've got the blade skewed one way or the other. It looks to me like it's a little high on the right, so we'll just move that lateral adjustment knob towards the right. And let's give it a shot on the edge of this piece of walnut just for a test piece. I'm going to use a piece of walnut and a piece of soft maple here, and we'll just see what kind of results we get, and we'll just spin that knob a little bit until we start to get a very tiny amount of shaving coming, and it's coming fairly dead center. Let's just do that on the piece of maple that I have here as well. And let's just see how thick that ends up being coming out of there. Yeah, that's a 1/2 thou as well, without even trying. Now I'm curious to know what it's like on the surface of a board here, and whether or not it's going to want to pull one way or the other. Okay, so this was maybe a little bit of a thicker cut, but just out of curiosity, how thin is it? It's still just a 1/2 thou. It's still pretty thin, so I'm pretty happy with that. Well, what's my first impression of the WoodRiver 5.5 jack plane? Very positive. I really like this plane so far. I've got very limited use with it, but I do think it's a great plane. It slices through the maple and the walnut scrap pieces here that I have very easily. The machining looks really good. The blade's of high quality. The whole tool is just going to be a great addition to my shop. Yes, some people might criticize the WoodRiver planes for not having as much spit polish or pristine on them like some of the Lie-Nielsen's, for example, but that's okay with me. I'm looking for a plane that does its job well, that's not going to necessarily break the bank. So the WoodRiver 5.5 fits the bill perfectly for that. It's going to get a lot of use over the next little while on a ton of different projects I have upcoming, so make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss some of those builds. Until next time, go build something beautiful.